Hey everybody, Dr. Schlater, Unit 7, Lesson 6, Activity 6.3, Absolute Elevation and Temperature. We've talked about elevation and temperature as good examples of where to use negative and positive numbers. Let's talk about how we use absolute value as well. A part of the city of New Orleans is 6 feet below sea level, so we would use negative 6 feet to describe its elevation. But the absolute value of negative 6 feet describes its vertical distance from sea level. Absolute value tells us our distance from zero. Zero for elevation is sea level. So let's describe what all these numbers mean in terms of elevation. So when you see positive 25 feet, that is 25 feet of sea level. But when you see the absolute value, we have to talk about distance. So this is the distance between 25 feet of sea level and sea level. So we're talking about the distance between being 25 feet above sea level and where sea level is. The same thing is going on with negative numbers. When we see negative 8 feet, that is 8 feet below sea level. Parts of New Orleans are below sea level. That's why it floods. But when I see the absolute value of negative 8 feet, that is the distance between 8 feet below sea level and sea level. So remember, every time I'm talking about absolute value, I have to talk about the distance. And I'm always comparing it to what zero is. And for elevation, zero means sea level. Okay, the elevation of a city is different from sea level by 12 feet. So notice what that's telling me there. That's telling me a difference or a distance. What could the elevations be? Well, I could be 10 feet above sea level. I know I don't do this very often, but if I wanted to write that as a number, I'll put the positive sign and say that's positive 10. That elevation is different from sea level by 10 feet. Or I could be 10 feet below sea level. We would definitely use a negative sign to talk about that number. So each of those are different from sea level by 10 feet. And so if I wrote down some equations here, what I'm saying is the absolute value of positive 10 is 10. 10 feet above sea level is 10 feet away from sea level. And the absolute value of negative 10 is also 10. 10 feet below sea level has a distance of 10 feet from sea level. Now, we can also do this with temperatures. We can write negative 5 degrees Celsius to describe a temperature that is 5 degrees below freezing. And of course, positive 5 degrees Celsius for a temperature that is 5 degrees above freezing. So let's do that down here, and then let's bring in absolute value. So this is 1 degree Celsius above freezing. T is 4 degrees Celsius below freezing. But what does this mean? Well, it's an absolute value, so I have to talk about the distance between 12 degrees Celsius above freezing. That's what positive 12 means. And what is the zero for temperature? Well, the zero for temperature is freezing. That's the distance between being 12 degrees above freezing Celsius and just being plain freezing. And the same thing down here. This is going to be the distance between 7 degrees below, well, let's put Celsius in there, below freezing and freezing. So we're always comparing in absolute value to whatever the zero is. The zero for temperature is freezing when we're talking about degrees Celsius. So we're always talking about the distance between these temperatures and freezing. Okay, which temperature is colder? -6 degrees Celsius or 3 degrees Celsius? And hopefully you know those negative temperatures are colder. So -6 degrees Celsius. Which temperature is closer to freezing temperature? -6 degrees Celsius or 3 degrees Celsius? When you take a look at this, you're trying to say which one is closer to 0, which is the freezing temperature. And -6 degrees is 6 degrees away, and 3 degrees is 3 degrees away. So the answer to this is 3 degrees Celsius. So which temperature has a smaller absolute value? And we just showed that it has to be 3 degrees Celsius because 3 is closer to 0 than -6. Absolute value measures your distance from 0, in this case, freezing. So in this case, the one that has a smaller absolute value is 3 degrees Celsius.